So welcome everyone. Arborist call, April 8th, 2021. Got a really great agenda today. So the normal little welcome and meeting intro. TR is going to do an update on ZebraD. We have a slot for research and implementation status updates. We kind of, since we're meeting every 2 weeks, we kind of use those as needed for updates. And then on the kind of the more general discussion side, where topics vary from meeting to meeting, we're going to kind of do an update on NU5, including progress on the audits timeline, going down the foundation checklist, a unified addresses update, and then Dodger had suggested we chat about Signal, have at least an initial chat about Signal's adoption of MobileCoin, and then just kind of a general wrap up, open announcements, any comments from anyone, any action items that we want to carry over to the next meeting or async in the Discord R&D server. Quickly, Arborist calls, bi-weekly calls where protocol contributors get together to talk about upgrades, timelines, process, R&D, design and implementation, any kind of blockers or unresolved issues. Arborist calls, the goal is to make protocol development more accessible for a wider set of participants and to provide more transparency into the protocol side of Zcash to the community at large. Who can participate? Anyone can participate. Anyone that's interested in learning more about protocol development, we encourage you to join. And if nothing else, just listen, ask your questions. If there's something that you wanted to present or you want to suggest to be presented, you don't have to present it yourself. You can just reach out to me. Best way is Steven@electriccoin.co, and I'll work to get you kind of slotted in as fast as we can. So with that, we're at the status, node status update section. Tior, I'll turn it over to you. Did you want to share your screen, I'm guessing?
I don't actually have any slides to present,
okay.
So I might just talk to it.
Okay, that's fine, no problem. I'll just leave this slide up here.
Sure. So with Zebra, we're just about to put out a release today or tomorrow, an alpha release. And that alpha release will have batch cryptography for all of the canopy cryptography in place, except for the transparent script, which we use an external dependency for. And with that, the sync takes about 3 hours, as long as you've got a few cores and the sync isn't network constrained. So that's the level of progress we've made. We still have to verify a few canopy consensus rules, but we've been mainly focusing on the NU5 consensus rules because they're the newest and the riskiest ones. Right. So on that, we've started on the NU5 implementation. We have designs and implementations in progress for Orchard and transaction version 5. Nice. We've done detailed, sorry?
No, very nice. That's great. Great progress, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it seems to fall out pretty naturally. There's a few tricky bits with trying to abstract over the differences between the latest 2 transaction versions, but it's pretty easy to get done. We've done detailed planning, so we have tickets for all of the NU5 specs and zips. We've finished a bunch of stability fixes, so the next release, it shouldn't hang or crash. We've been testing it for a few weeks now, and we just think it will keep on running, which is great. And we've made some progress on some network security fixes, and we're going to keep on working on those as we go along. The Zebra network stack was the first proof of concept code that we wrote, and so we need to put a little bit of work into getting that robust. And we've also just finished an audit of Frost, and there's a blog post on the Foundation blog about that. And that's it for the Zebra update. just to let you know some things that we're waiting on. So we think the spec is fairly complete, but we just wanted to check in if there were any outstanding changes to the NU5 spec. And we're waiting on some test vector files for Orchard transaction version 5, non-malleable transaction IDs, Halo, Sensemia. We're looking for generated test vectors in files. We understand there's some code for some of those test vectors, but it can be a bit tricky to serialize that correctly. So we'd like to see the test vectors linked from the spec. We can possibly generate some of the Orchard and transaction version 5 test vectors when we get to that and send them to the Zcash D team. But yeah, we just need to work on those together over the next few weeks.
Okay.
Cool.
Very good.
I think
Go ahead,
I think the remaining spec issues are only to do with unified addresses.
Great, that's good to know.
Is that in the actual protocol spec itself, or is that just in the addition of the zip?
So I'm currently writing a zip 316, which is going to be everything about unified addresses, and then the spec will delegate to that.
Okay.
Relatedly, there was some chatter about making spending keys, incoming viewing keys, and full viewing keys also unified in a similar manner. Is that evolving, or?
So I think we're pretty much agreed to do that for viewing keys.
Okay.
Probably both IVKs and FVKs. I don't think we had consensus on whether to do it for keys, but we'll see.
For spending keys?
Yeah.
Okay, sure. Cool. Thank you.
Sorry, spending keys.
Right. Okay. So we were going to talk about NU5 and Orchard unified addresses coming up as well. So it's kind of a good segue. But I want to say before moving on, that's like excellent progress on the ZebRD side. So that's really good. On the test vectors, I don't have any slide for that in particular, but Chris, I know you're on the call. I know you had been working on test vectors of some sort with Taylor, I believe. Right?
Yeah, those were the test vectors for the Sensemia hashing.
Okay. All right, so test vectors for that. And then I know I had created an issue for test vectors for transaction format v5, just kind of as a placeholder or something.
We do not yet have that. I'm still deep in the midst of that implementation.
Okay, cool, very good. All right. Okay, well, we'll just kind of move generally along, and we'll make sure that we get, all the questions answered as we go. And feel free, anyone, to chime in either in chat or just interrupt me as we're moving forward. The proposed features, there were a couple of questions in Discord that came up since the last call because we were proposing a shift to the timeline to accommodate unified addresses, both from the development work as well as like the security aspect, and then also ecosystem education and things of that nature. So the question was, oh, does that mean we're like opening the door for new things in NU5? And the answer is a definitive no, we're not. It's the same zips we proposed, plus UAs, if you will. So that's kind of the set that we've had up there for a while. In terms of the timeline, what we had talked about was a 60-day shift in activation timeline. We had originally targeted August 1st for mainnet activation. That would now be October 1st for mainnet activation. Backing up 3 months, you'd have testnet activation July 1st. The release supporting testnet would be mid-June, roughly. So that's kind of what the timeline looks like. We, no major objections that we noted from anyone. The ecosystem partners we have been in touch with were very positive on the concept of UAs, and no one really expressed hesitation over adoption friction or anything along those lines in terms of like the actual upgrade itself. So, as this is kind of the schedule we're working off at the moment. There's some additional things we're doing on. We have the NCC audit. We've already completed the spec audit for that. We're doing some additional things to kind of make sure that work includes UAs as well. So we're getting some additional information over to them The security, the scientific review is underway at the moment, so that's in progress. We're looking to adjust perhaps the implementation audit for NCC a little bit later, which is, I don't think is going to be a problem. Originally, we kind of had it, roughly in the month of May, but we'll probably bleed over a little into June. But we're working with NCC on that. And then there's another audit vendor that we've been working with to get a contract in place, and we'll hopefully have information on them at the next Arborist call. But a second audit focused more on the cryptography as opposed to software assessment of kind of the protocol like NCC typically does. So that's kind of what the schedule looks like. So any questions about that or comments before I move on? Nope, don't see any. Okay. In terms of, so this is the checklist. This was from a Foundation blog post that was put out right after we kind of announced that we'd like to do Halo. At that point, we were calling, I think, Halo on Zcash. Anyway, for NU5, we were proposing that. And so it's like the series of items that, great set of requirements. So number one, the proof system and spec for the new circuit and consensus changes should be published as a zip or cryptographic spec along the lines of sapling. So, we have those produced at the moment. They're, I mean, obviously, if this new audit vendor comes back on the spec side and goes, oh, wow, this doesn't exactly match up, that doesn't mean we wouldn't tweak it, but no significant changes. And then, as Dara mentioned, there's also ZIP 316, which will contain, the rationale for unified addresses and be linked to in the spec. Number two, the Halo 2 proof system should receive appropriate independent scientific peer review. And that is ongoing at the moment. As I mentioned before, Mary Mahler's doing that. And that's going along nicely. Number three is the implementation and all consensus changes should receive extensive outside code review along the lines of what NCC did for sapling and overwinter. NCC's already finished the spec audit except for UAs. They'll be doing the implementation audit as well. And then this additional vendor, everyone's going to be very pleased with who they are. A very well respected name in the crypto world. So number four, changes to consensus rules such as sprout deprecation or use of new turnstiles should be clearly announced to the community well in advance. I believe we've done that. There's the orchard pool is a new pool, which means to migrate to that pool is through the same turnstile mechanism as going from sprout to sapling. Number five, API changes such as mods Libra Zcash should be explained to the community as part of the proposed zip release process, and software libraries should be finalized with sufficient time for developers to integrate and test them. Our goal is to have the bulk of that done by testnet activation, which gives us a 3-month window for partner adoption, as it's called, but essentially to test things out, make sure they work, get partners onboarded well ahead of mainnet activation. And then 6, have a deprecation proposal so that if a new feature needs to be migrated away from in the future, protocol complexity stays down over time. I think we have a dedicated channel in the R&D Discord to talk about, pool deprecation. So we don't have a certain, we don't have a specific zip in this network upgrade that says, okay, here's the new thing we're doing to enforce at the consensus level pool deprecation. So I think we're making.
It's
Go
not
ahead,
formally
Dara.
part of the upgrade, but there is a zip
Right.
describing that. It will be zip 315.
Okay.
But it's just a stub at the moment.
Okay. Right. So that's 6. And then number 7, most critically, wallet developers exchanges, no developers should be given sufficient time to review all the changes. So we reached out in January with, obviously the big change in NU5 is Orchard. And we reached out in early January, ran it by a number of ecosystem partners, introduced them to what the benefits were of Halo on Zcash, what it meant to them as from an ecosystem perspective as a partner to integrate. The feedback we got, which we actually documented in the blog post we did in early January, was very positive. So people were very excited about it. And our goal is to, like we mentioned back on, number 5, is to have everything done by testnet activation and work with partners well ahead of that time to begin prepping for testing in U5. All right. Any questions about any of that? Okay, so I'm going to pop out of
Oh,
this.
sorry, Stephen. I had a few questions.
Oh, sure. Go ahead. Yeah.
So how are we progressing with the pool life cycles zip conversation? I know that Nathan was working on that.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I've been, kind of an observer of that. I know that we had some general conversation in that channel. I'm trying to refresh my memory on kind of where we left it. But Nate is on our side. Nate is kind of the driver of the conversation and, some of the different options, talking to obviously the foundation, ecosystem partners, users, et cetera, to come up with or reach consensus around what that deprecation should look like. So that's, Nate's been on vacation actually for about a week and a half actually of the last couple of weeks. So haven't done much since the end of toward the end of March at this point, but he should be picking that back up when he gets back online next week.
That sounds good. I had another question just in terms of letting users know about the turnstile and things like that. Will there be blog posts from the ECC or or an FAQ for Orchard, just so that there's kind of a single source of information for people who have questions about Orchard to answer, to get to know how it works and how it'll impact them?
Yeah, so one of the to-dos is to define, like from Sprout to Sapling, there were really no shielded wallets at the moment other than Zcash D. So there was a pretty sophisticated migration utility that would look at the balance of Sprout funds you had and schedule migrations, over some period of time to, I guess, preserve as much, privacy, if you will, in that migration, because while it doesn't go, from Sprout to T-address to Sapling, it does go through the transparent pool. So similarly, a migration from Sapling to Orchard would go through the transparent pool. But the question now is, how should that migration, so that's kind of a to-do, is how should the migration utility work? Should it do a similar thing at the Zcash D level, where you look at the number of Sapling funds held and you kind of schedule it over time based on block height?
I thought we weren't going to do that.
Well, but that's my point. We were going to discuss it at one Arborist call, I think 2 back, and didn't really get to it. That's one option. But then what's changed is we do have a number of shielded mobile wallets now who don't have the, I guess they could, but they don't really have the luxury of scheduling like a long running process that occurs over, X number of days to migrate funds in the same way. So if, a mobile wallet kind of has to migrate in one shot, do we do the same at Zcash D? And the thought is that's probably the best thing to do, but we never kind of formally talked about it or agreed to it. The reason that's kind of germane to your question is what we document, in an FAQ or the network upgrade guide that we put out for every upgrade, would be, obviously would refer to that zip if we need a new zip for it, or the appropriate doc that describes it. So yes, most definitely on the documentation side, so everyone's aware. And then the to-do is determine how we want the migration utility to behave at the Zcash D side.
Thanks, that sounds good.
So happy to discuss everyone's thoughts on that, actually, if they'd like to, like what the migration utility should do at the Zcash D level at the moment. Obviously, we've got code already. I've already looked at it. Strad, who's intimately familiar with it, and others on the call, because they were around at that time, helped design and develop it. But it'd be pretty straightforward to do from Sapling to Orchard, but it'd also be really simple to just, kind of migrate your funds in bulk. So from an implementation perspective, I don't think it is a big delta in the engineering effort.
So the way we've been thinking about it is just try to make everything behave the same way.
Right.
So if you're limited by mobile wallets, then just make everything else look like a mobile wallet.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, I don't see the downside to that. Certainly, if anyone has a different opinion or would like to discuss it, that'd be fine too. But.
So I mean, the downside would be that you are leaking some information about your total amount of funds.
Right.
It isn't clear whether the migration procedure that we defined in, I think it's ZIP 308,
That was it. Yep.
actually succeeded in hiding as much information as we wanted it to. I was kind of hoping that some academic or whatever would try and attack it, but that never happened.
I mean, there were some drawbacks to the way that it ended up happening, I think, some of which were associated with the design and some of which were associated with the way it was rolled out.
Yeah.
I think we can overcook it, and I think that one was potentially a bit overcooked. But that said, within the space of what can be achieved on mobile and therefore everywhere, we can come up with something that does some hiding, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's still to be designed.
Right. Yeah. So to your point, Taylor, whatever that winds up looking like, and it sounds like making it look the same everywhere is probably the best choice, then we definitely have that captured in an FAQ. We always put out a network upgrade guide that pulls up to the top, even if information is in a zip somewhere. We try to bubble up things that are kind of things to be aware of that you may need to take action on, et cetera.
Yeah, what we definitely don't want to end up doing this time is to not have the migration story sorted out until months after the activation, which is what happened with
right. Mm-hmm.
With
yeah, that was actually I was actually going to take a shot at doing that when we got a little more of the NU5 infrastructure in place. So I think we'll have that one for sure. I've got a few months to do that.
Yeah,
so
we will not make the same mistake again.
Yeah, we'll have it ready. We'll have it ready when it launches for sure. All right. Let me see if there's anything. I don't think there's anything in the chat, but other questions. We could do. Kind of the next phase was update on UAs. I don't have specific slides for that. We do have it in the protocol spec. We have some information there, and then we also have a zip. Well, we have an issue in the zips repository, which is kind of it's a work in progress. But the overview of unified addresses, status, goals, concepts, terminology, those kind of things. So. Yeah. So so Dara, Strad, Brad, Zuko, anything in particular you want to call out on unified addresses or an update from the last call that we had?
Nothing comes to mind.
I know this was one thing, and it's kind of been one of those things where the more you think about it, the more things you clarify. So there's been some changes to the spec to just reflect the, kind of the understanding and to make it clear what a unified address is. So I guess I would turn it around. Are there any questions from anyone on the call?
I think there is something that's changed since the last time we talked, which is we now think that the unified address spec should require an orchard or shielded receiver in it. Is that news to anyone?
So there was an attack that was worked out by Taylor, which involves, so suppose that an adversary can replace an address, say on the clipboard or whatever, and the user is doing a cursory inspection that the address that they get is similar to the one that they've got from some other source. So let's say that they check the I don't know, the first 20 characters and the last 20 characters of the address. So with the way that unified payment addresses are currently specified in the protocol spec, or the draft NU5 protocol spec, that attack would succeed because you can, the adversary can just change the middle part of the address, and they can arrange that their address is encoded in that middle part, and that's the one that the client is likely to use. So we had to think about how to address this problem. And so one way of doing it is to have a kind of jumbling algorithm, which is like an unkeyed cipher. It mixes up the, it acts as a permutation on the space of encodings. So the idea is that if you do that, then an address that is visually similar to a target will end up having an unjumbled form that the attacker doesn't have much control over. So they can't make it so that their address is in the unjumbled form. So we defined an algorithm to do that, and then Taylor pointed out another attack, which is that let's say that the adversary isn't trying to steal your funds. They're just trying to either cause you to burn the funds or reveal some information about them. So, for example, force you to use a T address instead of an orchard address, or a sapling address, because then you would have to do a pool jumping a migration transaction from orchard to sapling if most of your funds were in orchard. And that would reveal the amount. So in order to address that, you might need to increase the size of addresses.
Steve, can you promote adding Nighthawk?
Sorry, I didn't hear what you said there.
Sorry, it's a request to Steve. Sorry, Dara.
Hey, I'm in the chat. Can you hear me?
Already promoted. Yeah, I can hear you.
Dara, about that, we talked today, Taylor, about that on the wallet stand up, and probably the extension of the address. Like, you know, I just want ask him about, like, what about the reply to thing on the memo that, you know, we're kind of used to on wallets. And
so I think that would still work.
Yeah.
What we would do is define a binary encoding. I think Zec Wallets already supports a binary encoding. I might be wrong there. And so we would use that in the case where your reply to address is an orchard address.
Yeah, what I ask is, like, what's, you know, the length extension, like how many bytes? And
I haven't worked it out yet.
Yeah, but yeah, I guess even if it took like half of the memo, you would still have like a kind of a tweet, like a new kind of tweet length. So
it's probably going to be less than 140 bytes for the reply to address, which means that you've got 512 minus that, which is 272, something like that. So that's probably better. Enough for, yeah, that's still a tweet's length.
Yeah, it's much more than I would say, oh, the worst case or
yeah, so that's assuming actually that you have a T address and an orchard address in your reply to.
There's no point in having a T address in a reply to.
Sorry?
There's no point in having a T address in a reply to.
Well, in that case,
that's
then
really,
it's even,
yeah, that's true.
Yeah, in that case, it's even more. That's a good point.
Yep, an orchard or a unified address that has an orchard address and a sapling address and a T address is 188 characters long, BEC32 encoded. So, yeah.
Yeah, so basically there's no problem here, because even in future when we define more address formats, we're unlikely to have UAs that include more than 3 formats at once. So it's going to be okay. What might be a little bit more difficult is if we want to authenticate that the sender knows the private key of each address. So that might be a little bit more difficult if you have more than one address type in there.
So a lot of good questions in the chat. I'll try to scroll back, and I think we've answered some of them already. Addie, did that kind of provide the overview you were looking for? Or you have additional questions?
Yeah, I think since this is so new, it would really help if we could have like a sample of all the supported combinations for transferring between unified addresses and the receiving parties, right?
Right. Got you.
Maybe some examples of what these things look like, and
yeah, we're I know we're working on that. Josh, I think let's see, is Josh Swihart on here? I think I got promoted Josh up.
I'm here. Yeah, so we're planning on publishing a blog post, probably middle of next week, that summarizes UAs and has a little video, but it will have some visual descriptors.
Yeah, examples.
Yep.
Yep. Yeah. So I think that'll be very good to help kind of solidify it in everyone's mind exactly kind of how these look and operate.
Yeah, absolutely. And especially since the user-defined assets, the ZSAs that are coming up, it'll just be a good idea to have all the clarity out there. So there's absolutely no confusion.
Right.
So to answer the questions in the chat about how CSAs are likely to interact with unified addresses, basically, so it's indistinguishable which asset you're sending. So you can send any asset to a UA that supports CSAs, and that's very likely how it would work. So they're kind of orthogonal.
Right.
So eventually we'll want test vectors with all the supported combinations of addresses in a unified address. I imagine other wallet developers will want that before the Zebra team, but yeah, that would be great. It doesn't need to be ready for the blog post, but yeah, we'll need it for testing.
Definitely.
Yep, that makes sense.
Totally agreed.
We're,
and Taylor posted in,
yeah, we're not quite ready to do that yet because we need to work out how this jumbling algorithm is going to work. We have a specification for the algorithm itself. What we don't have is a resolution to this this latest attack that Taylor came up with.
Yeah, so Taylor posted an example of what a UA might look like. So U1 asterisk with, in the case he posted, a T adder, sapling adder, and orchard. Yep. And without the jumbling, as Taylor noted, yeah.
In terms of usability, what's the largest number of types we're expecting to have active in a unified address? Are we planning on one more address format for Zcash shielded assets, and that will be, then we'll have 4 of them, or is it likely we'll end up with more than that?
I would imagine we would only typically have at most 3, and because ZSAs do not need a new address type or when we add them, we won't add 2 new address types. We'll probably only add 1 new address type. So and then you likely only need T addresses for sort of interoperability with things that only support T addresses, and the last 2 address formats. So I think it's unlikely that you would need more than that.
So are you, just to be clear, you're saying that you will start deprecating sapling when we introduce Zcash shielded addresses?
No, nobody's saying that. Yeah, sorry.
Okay, so I'm just trying to be clear.
Yeah, so this isn't, and someone who has more theory on this can hop in, but the type codes that are defined in here aren't meant to be, and when we say how many do you expect, it's like, oh, well, you could expect, 3 or 4, but that doesn't mean that it'll be capped at that. So it means you got to kick one out to add one in. And part of the spec actually says that, and it was just right down, yeah, consumers must ignore addresses with type codes they don't recognize. We want unified addresses to be very flexible, meaning, we think of it today as receiver types, right? But it could be a different type. I don't know what those types might be, but we want to make UAs be a means for reducing friction in upgrades or enhanced functionality. So I don't know that we would want to, like, say there's a max of 4 or anything along those lines.
Yeah, so the way I interpreted Taylor's question is what is going to be the typical length for usability reasons, not what is a cap on the length.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, I was asking effectively about defaults and how that will work.
I thought you had something about
for a hard cap.
Oh yeah,
I suspect it will be unlikely to be more than 3 addresses. So.
Sorry, I thought I heard you say, does that mean we would deprecate sapling before we added something else? I misinterpreted what you said there.
No,
Sorry.
what I meant was, does that mean we will start leaving out sapling addresses when we introduce Zcash shielded addresses by default? And that's not deprecating the sapling pool, but that is starting to make some moves towards saying sapling is not the latest and greatest thing anymore. Right. And maybe it won't always be available in an address that you get, which is something that we should make clear to people, I think, in when we start talking about Zcash shielded addresses, I think.
Yeah.
Just to let people know that.
Carry on.
Yeah, go ahead.
Just to let people know that we're making some movement in that direction.
Right. So I think the reason why you would have the most recent 2 address formats is just to provide a buffer while you're changing over from one to the other. It's not that we would encourage that you continue using the old format for a long period, and we want people to migrate their funds to the newest pool.
Right.
And partly because when you have a cross-pool transaction, you're leaking information. So we want to sort of take that privacy hit all in one go and avoid sort of the ongoing privacy cost of leaking information for transfers between pools, because everyone is likely to be on the most recent pool.
Right, got you. So maybe missing something here, but I would think we would we don't have Sprout in here, right? Because you can't send funds to a Sprout address anymore, right? That sapling would stay in here until you could no longer send funds to a sapling address.
Yes.
Right. Okay. All right. I just want to make sure I wasn't misunderstanding. Okay. Perfect. All right. Very good. Great questions, by the way. But as Josh mentioned, just to kind of summarize a bit, we've been working on a blog post that's got some examples and explains it a little bit that we can use as, kind of talking points as we introduce it to more and more people. All right, so any other questions about unified addresses? I'd also point you to this issue, again, as I mentioned in Zcash Zips, issue 470. It's where we had originally kind of iterated on goals, requirements, et cetera, in a Google Doc. We converted that over into a zip, zip issue, work in progress kind of thing. Zip 316, I believe, is a zip number assigned for this. So eventually a good bit of this would wind up in Zip 316.
Yeah, I mean, I can share my draft of 316 if you want now. I think you have to stop screen sharing for me to do that.
Oh, sure.
Is that?
Yes.
I just want to ask. I just want to ask Addy, like, Addy, do you feel that you have enough information at the moment to be able to have any confidence about your guys' ability to have this ready in time for mainnet activation?
So it feels right now that everything is ready at the math level, but the requirements are not fully ironed out. So maybe the blog posts and further discussions will help clarify all kinds of supported features. And then once we know that, the mobile wallets and the developers can solidify those requirements in the code.
Yeah, and what we're committed to on the ECC side is with the SDKs, having support in the SDKs for unified addresses by testnet activation.
Yeah, that should work out great.
Yeah. So what we have here is so the requirements and motivation from that ticket that Stephen was just screen sharing, and then we have sort of definitions of terms and what the conformance requirements are on a wallet, and then the encoding, which is basically just copied from the spec, which is why it's still in LaTeX. And then this section on address hardening, which is the jumbling algorithm that I was talking about earlier. Okay, yeah. So that's what's currently in the draft zip. But there will be more about rationale.
Okay.
So I think that is likely to be so ready for a PR that people can comment on probably on Monday.
Sounds good.
Okay,
Very good.
so I will stop screen sharing then.
So any further questions on anything NU5 unified addresses, anything at all that anyone has that we didn't cover already? Nope, I think we got it. Okay, so Dodger, one of the other items you had discussed, let me go back and see how it was worded. Signal's adoption of MobileCoin. Yeah, so.
Can I say something about that?
Yeah, go ahead, Zuko. I know we've been, and well, I know you've been doing quite a bit on that side, so.
Yeah, I'm trying to decide where to start. Moxie and I go way back, and I've been talking to him about Signal and crypto since 2017. In 2017, they started the MobileCoin project, and there was a financial component to where the MobileCoin like funding model would benefit Signal. The specific details I don't really know. Maybe I can find out from the now public information or whatever. But but then there's also the UX component, which is that the secret of Signal's success, in my view, is first of all to be uncompromising on security, and then second to prioritize UX above all. And that's why that's why I use Signal, and everyone uses Signal instead of all the other comparable things that had worse UX. And so Moxie always had these very specific goals with regard to UX. Another historical sidelight, when yeah, I agree with Deirdre. Another historical sidelight is that when we were designing Zcash before launch in 2015 or early 2016, the Stellar Consensus Protocol was new, and we did a pretty deep dive and we said, okay, now we know how to do shielded transactions. Are we going to layer them on top of the Bitcoin Consensus Protocol or on top of the Stellar Consensus Protocol? And we settled on the Bitcoin consensus protocol because we preferred the openness, like the resiliency and decentralization. It seemed pretty difficult to. It wasn't exactly clear how resilient the Stellar consensus protocol was. Maybe it was fine. I don't know. It was kind of confusing, but it was also new and untested. So I think it's super ironic. Oh, so the reason I'm bringing this up is that MobileCoin is based on the Stellar consensus protocol, among other things. That's why it's got such fast finality, which is one of the key UX goals, and such high transaction throughput. It's totally ironic that the Stellar itself, the actual Stellar network, the first deployment of the Stellar consensus protocol happened to break yesterday. I hope nobody hears me cackling. It's not very nice. It's just an interesting, ironic fact that happened.
You can.
But that's why we didn't. That's why Zcash has slow finality right now, is because we wanted the resiliency and robustness. And our current research project is aimed at not making the trade-off so much between decentralization and openness versus performance, but finding something that's still fully robust and decentralized and open, but is also much better performance.
Yeah,
but the important thing is
Vitalik had a post recently on sharding, where he talked about this trilemma between decentralization and security.
Yeah, for sure. So that's our motivation for the the scalability priority within ECC all this time. And in fact, Signal is one of many examples of potentially high profile, potentially large numbers of users, partners. We've talked to, like name brand companies that have hundreds of millions of users. Signal maybe only has tens of millions, maybe hundreds. They won't say exactly, but Signal's one of them. But we've talked to at least 4 such name brand things that could bring tens or hundreds of millions of users, and had a pretty similar conversation where a big part of it was they want to know, what's your plan for scalability? And if we say, not sure, well, we're definitely going to scale somehow, but we're a little bit vague, we haven't exactly decided how yet, that's not good enough. Like they go to Stellar or something, look for something else. So that's why we think at ECC, we think we have to make a credible plan for scaling before we can get any of these name brand companies. And there's a lot more besides those 4, but we have many data points of people that have literally, in one case, they have 1 billion users, 2 cases. Anyway, so what was my point? Oh, the important thing is that, I think deploying peer-to-peer, decentralized, censorship-resistant crypto in Signal or crypto coin in Signal is awesome. It's a good step forward and a good experiment for us all to learn from. That Signal and Zcash have great alignment of values and intentions. So I'm actually pretty hopeful that now that Signal gets the benefit of this experience, and they get to find out sort of all the sharp edges and pros and cons, and they get all the feedback from their users about who hates, who loves it, and why, and all that stuff, then it might actually be easier for us to get Zcash into a future upgrade of Signal than it was before. And Moxie said as much publicly and privately, that he'd really like to additionally add Zcash. But to circle back, it was never really an option that we could have been the first, in large part, I think, originally because of the financial tie-in. Zcash had already launched and already had all this liquidity. We didn't really have the option of offering some kind of giant pre-mine or something to get into the first cut. So anyway, that's my story.
We deliberately chose not to do a pre-mine.
Right.
So shall we talk about the elephant in the room, which is SGX?
Well, hold on. Deirdre had her hand up first. So.
Thank you. We can talk about SGX, but I had a first question, which was there ever a conversation of taking sapling and slapping it on top of a consensus layer that was not decentralized Bitcoin-based consensus? Was that ever an option about sort of putting something together that was newish as opposed to something that was more off the shelf? Like
there was
with
there was a
MobileCoin?
conversation about that at ZCon 1 with I think was it Matt Green? I can't remember what. Yeah, I think it was Matt Green talking about doing that for Cosmos.
Yeah, for
and it never really
Signal's
went
uses
anywhere.
specifically, not kind of in general, but like to solve the constraints that Signal is trying to work within. I mean, we are only part, like Moxie would probably have to answer that question, but it's
Well,
sort of like, yeah.
are you suggesting like sapling in something new that's centralized?
Like,
yeah,
like you can think of
that was-
MobileCoin
but-
as Monero on Stellar in SGX, right?
Yeah.
And if you replace the Monero part with sapling, it would be way better, right? I don't think
No.
it's anonymous. Like, not anonymous is the wrong word, but I think it leaks a bunch of information about the users currently. I'm guessing. I don't understand how SGX could possibly protect, even when SGS works. I still don't see how it can prevent that kind of information leakage that can de-anonymize the user. So anyway,
Yeah,
I'd never had that conversation. Maybe I'd had that conversation with the MobileCoin folks and with Moxie, but again, like the situation was that they were going to do their own thing, and I wasn't going to tell them to do things differently. Like that's up to them, you know.
Yeah. So one of Moxie's requirements was that payments didn't depend on the uptime of a third party. So if you think of putting sapling on something new, not decentralized, unless Signal were hosting it themselves, then that would be dependent on a third party. That was one of the specific requirements he had. Okay, next in line was Dara. Dara had a hand up.
Yeah.
Elephant in the room, right?
Yeah, SGX.
Right.
So, I mean, SGX is completely dependent on Intel. So it is centralized. It is completely centralized. Now, I think the idea is that they're trying to use it in a way that, hang on, I'll put my hand down. They're trying to use it in a way that sort of user security does not depend on SGX. But in that case, I'm not sure what they're actually getting from SGX. Because if you design a system that is supposed to be secure, even if SGX is subverted, but then considering how often SGX actually is subverted, that's the security of your system, and the SGX is just complexity. So that's my view.
I'll speak to it really quickly. My understanding is they use, Signal already relies on SGX, so that is already within their threat model.
Yes, that's true.
As do like other orgs, so it's not just Signal who kind of do this like opportunistic, if SGX is not broken, we have more privacy type of approach. But in the MobileCoin scenario, as I understand, they use SGX in part because they have a centralized setting. So the same way that Zcash exposes viewing keys, my understanding is that they're hiding viewing keys in part via the SGX server. So that's one way that they're using SGX. Another way, I mean, they're just in a much more centralized model, right? So like all clients are going to like a very small number of servers to fetch transactions. So my understanding is that they're using SGX to sort of account for that. And that's the trade-off between, you know, an established system that is closed.
I'm laughing at Deirdre's tweet.
But I mean, like, in all honesty,
seriously.
Like, at it, but this is being deployed to millions of users. So I think we should be a little humble, and I think we should be like, okay, this is the trade-offs that some designers of a successful protocol were willing to make. And maybe we're not willing to make those same trade-offs, but I think we definitely need to examine our own assumptions and say like, okay, this is what is required to roll out a live system. What can we learn from it?
Yeah.
Well put.
Yeah, very well put. And right. So SGX, I know Signal has something called secure value recovery that leverages SGX as well. So that, but that totally separate from MobileCoin.
It is
So
secure value recovery, which bootstraps the groups and the group calling that they have rolled out in the past, I don't know, 6 to 12 months. Like they built a system that hinges on the security of SGX, and it allowed them to build a whole bunch of other features separate, but within the same threat model for MobileCoin. So basically, if you're already trusting SGX for a whole bunch of other stuff for signal features, like sure, we can price in MobileCoin and it will still offer some security and privacy even if SGX fails. But we already have a bad news bears day if SGX fails for Signal for other reasons. Plus one to everything that Chelsea said, I wish SGX was not a pile of hacks in a trench coat pretending to be a secure enclave. But it isn't. I wish it worked, but it keeps getting broken.
So so I think we
broken
can,
every 4 months.
Yeah, so everyone knows that those are there. I think the hard question is, okay, fine, those are there. The constraints that that Signal has are X. What, like, we can't just laugh at SGX and be like, oh, haha, it's broken, we're better. No, I think we need to ask the hard questions and say, these are the reasons that led to making those decisions.
Yeah.
And if we can't say we provide an alternative and here's why, without, like, in those same constraints, then we're doing ourselves and our community a disservice, in my opinion, and the whole blockchain community, not just us. So but like, for real, like, there's trade-offs. Like, they're working within a centralized model. That's a reality. Probably these very large orgs, like, will also have a centralized model where there'll be one server that all the clients go to, and like, if that one server is holding all the viewing keys, like, what's the privacy and anonymity trade-offs? So I think it's fun. We can all sit here and, like, talk about how broken SGX is and, like, rant on Twitter or whatever. I think that's the easy discussion. The harder discussion is, this is what's needed to roll things out, and what are we going to do about it? I think that's a better
good point. Yep. Dodger, I want to get you in there. Your hand's been up for a while, and then Taylor, yeah, and then Daryl.
Yeah, Chelsea's already kind of said part of what I was going to say. You know, my motivation in bringing this up wasn't to kind of say, well, why didn't they use Zcash? It was to, you know, I think it was just a good opportunity to raise this point. You know, like, as Chelsea says, there's some really interesting trade-offs. Signal had a bunch of requirements, you know, that they needed to meet. And I remember, you know, in the past within ECC, we discussed some of those, and, you know, one of the kind of conclusions was that maybe there's a hybrid model where Zcash is decentralized, but a specific integration is a little bit more centralized, you know.
Right.
So you know, it wasn't at all intended to suggest that Zcash could have or should have been adopted by Signal. It's just more like, I think it's an interesting opportunity to see, right, well, what were Signal's requirements? How did MobileCoin solve those? What were the trade-offs? And then, is there anything that we can then kind of, you know, integrate into our you know, thinking about Zcash as we go forward? It's not like something that tactical. It's more just kind of speculative and strategic to kind of incorporate that stuff into our thinking.
Right. Good point, Dodger. Taylor, you were next.
Awesome. Yeah. So I want to echo the point about SGX. I think we just don't understand how to build secure processors well enough. It's going to be a while before we know how to make these things secure. Also want to echo Chelsea's points about meeting these requirements are really important. And so in kind of this context, I want to shill my personal vision of Zcash as an anonymous communication network. So I'll post a link to this ticket I wrote in the chat so you can all look at it. But basically what I'm arguing in this ticket is that Zcash is, so if you're not familiar, anonymous communication networks are things like Tor and mixnets and stuff that let you communicate anonymously. And the argument I make in this ticket is that Zcash already is one of these things. We already see applications like Zbay that are trying to use the memo field as a way to communicate between its users anonymously. And I think this could be a really valuable differentiator for Zcash. It's something that goes beyond the cryptocurrency space. It's something that, as I argue in this ticket, it's something that we'll need as we begin to compress transactions using zero knowledge proofs. Wallets will need to be able to communicate with each other to actually send the transaction information that's not on the blockchain anymore. They'll need to send information to each other privately. And so it will need some kind of private way of distributing information, like a mixnet or something. And that could be something that's
not just private, but the metadata hiding. So
exactly, yeah. And so that could be something, if that's built into our platform, that could be something that is extremely valuable for a customer like Signal, if they could somehow flip a switch and start using our platform to hide all of that metadata between all of their messages sent between all of their users. So yeah, something to think about. I think we're strongly positioned to do something in that space, but it's also there's a project called NIM that's also working on this, and I've checked out their white paper that looks really cool. So yeah.
Dara, your hand was.
Very cool.
Thank you, Taylor. By the way, that is a really cool write-up. Taylor did a great job on that. Dara.
So I agree with Chelsea that that there's a defensible design choice, which is to trade off centralization for other properties. But if you actually just Google MobileCoin decentralized, then you get a bunch of things sort of claiming that MobileCoin is completely decentralized in the same sense that, say, Bitcoin is. There's a TechCrunch article calling it a decentralized cryptocurrency. There's a Wired article says it preserves privacy and decentralization. The MobileCoin Foundation, their GitHub says, sort of watcher nodes continuously monitor the integrity of the decentralized network. So it's sold as decentralized, and it isn't, because it's on Stellar, and Stellar is centralized.
It's definitely centralized. Like, sorry, I didn't mean to say like, I was more like, let's hold the mirror up to ourselves, not, I didn't mean to comment on MobileCoin or any other choices.
Right, but I think they're not being transparent about what they are, and they're calling it decentralized. It's not.
So like Chelsea says, it's a great opportunity to guide our own priorities, and it's a good example to look at to say, could we do this well or better? And I think it's totally a good, I think Zcash is a prime candidate to get added to Signal in the future, once they, like in a year or so, once they get experience from their MobileCoin experiment. And once we continue to improve Zcash with things like unified addresses.
Hudson, you were up next.
There's the unmute. Hello. Taylor, I like your write-up. I've only been able to, since I just opened it, like look through it. But I wanted to comment. I've been not like directly involved, but have like seen years of ACNs try to be built up from stuff like Scuttlebutt and Status, IM, and a few others. And the really hard part is getting adoption, because there's a lot of like open design questions around these communication networks. And even when they're implemented, people don't want to go through the trouble of stuff like, oh, I have to have a mnemonic phrase backed up before I can even start to use this network that has both a currency and a communication network attached. They'd rather use something like, Telegram or WeChat or whatever that has like the integrated currency features that are centralized. So I've seen this like fail a lot. So it's a really good idea and it's exciting, but I think there needs to be a broader question about usability and like UX around this stuff, because I've seen it fail so many times. It worries me if too many resources go towards an ACN concept before the public's ready.
Yeah, 100%. That makes total sense to me. I think I'm not fully aware of all the history of ACN project attempts that have failed, but I think the Zcash community specifically is in a really good position to do something like this, because it's something we can argue that we'll need in the future, and we also have this ability to deploy code to nodes, and just get nodes to run mixnet nodes, for example. So I think those kinds of things are something we could solve, and I have full confidence in everyone who's involved in Zcash to be able to figure that out.
Yeah, it seems
by
like
the way,
first. Oh, go ahead.
I was involved in an ACN that failed Mixminion. So
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, like I think the order of operations in my mind is like perfecting the UX and usability of a Zcash mobile wallet, or not. Like when I say perfecting, I mean getting like mass adoption of something like that, and then working on stuff within ACNs that like want to be integrated into other like wallets and clients and stuff like that, so we can make it like more of an SDK route rather than like a simple like make it like a protocol, an SDK that can then be plugged into these already existing bunch of mobile wallets and then grow from there.
Yeah, it's a platform. You need great documentation, great libraries for it to be a success. Totally agree.
Yeah, I mean, Strata's has been involved with I2P, and it has that advantage of being a library that's more easily integrated into applications than Tor, because Tor is it's structured as a daemon, and it's really difficult to make sure that a daemon is running and you can always access it from your application.
Oh, just real quick, if this is wrapping up this part of the conversation, I was going to mention someone, I think in the forums, said it would be good to have a ZOMG representative on the Arborist calls. So I'm doing a soft commit to be that person. So as long as y'all can let me know ahead of time if there's ZOMG specific stuff on there, but I'm always happy to answer questions about where certain grants are going if I have that knowledge, and I plan to be on all the calls that I'm able to for Arborist and just, chime in when necessary, especially about ZOMG issues. So always available for people to hit me up on that.
Very good. I kind of assumed you're already that soft committed representative. So
yeah,
that's
no,
great.
I just want to make it more clear now because I know someone
okay.
asked about that, so I wasn't sure.
Yeah. I think I forget who suggested it. It was definitely echoed by several folks to have a representative. So it's very good. And not only just ZOMG, that aside, we appreciate your input and feedback. All your, like you did the what can we learn from each other Ethereum Zcash call, and we appreciate your involvement in the project, and your involvement on the ZOMG side, of course, but your involvement in general is welcome. So. All right, anyone, Dodger, anything on that else on MobileCoin? We talked about it, kind of met your kind of goals or whatever.
I think it's something that warrants further in-depth focus, but it's not urgent.
Yeah, right.
It's just something that I think is worth kind of it'd be great to kind of look at what sort of Moxie's requirements were, and look at the, kind of map out what the trade-offs are with MobileCoin, but it's certainly not an urgent thing.
Okay, cool, very good. All right, anyone have anything else you want to cover today? We can actually wrap up maybe a few minutes early this time.
We're gonna finish early. Wow.
As opposed to a few minutes late. So this 2-week thing is working. We finally got caught up in the queue a little bit, I think. So okay.
Awesome, because it's midnight here.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, time zone challenges, and I know it affects everyone different, but my goodness, daylight savings time, it was whatever, the 14th in the US, the 28th in Europe, the 4th in New Zealand. Singapore doesn't observe it, so it's like juggling meetings across all those time zones during this change has been interesting. So anyway, okay, great. Well, look, everyone, have a good rest of the day. Good evening to Dara. Anyone in the UK, and Dodger, that's you, of course, as well. And yeah, so we'll keep up async in the Discord, and let me know if there's ever anything, I can help with at all, facilitate or help someone with context. So, all right, everyone, have a good rest of the day.
Cool.
Bye, everyone.
Cheerio.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
See you later.